A local farmer's tractor was towed in the middle of harvest because one HOA leader thought it didn't fit the neighborhood. Karen Latchfield, obsessed with control and appearances, had no idea she was interfering with a state food security contract. But Clayton Grims wasn't just any farmer. He had the law, the state, and a quiet fire behind him. Just wait until you see how this small-town standoff turned into a powerful showdown for justice. At the height of harvest, when every minute felt like a coin slipping through tight fingers, Clayton Grims paused beside his tractor, chest heaving, shirt stuck to his back with sweat. The sun bore down on his fields like a furnace, and the golden rows of corn shimmered under the heat. He unscrewed the cap from his thermos and took a quick swig of water, lukewarm but necessary. 10 feet away, his 12-year-old son, Benny, hauled crates of sweet corn into the flatbed trailer with the kind of quiet determination only kids raised on hard work seem to have. His cheeks were red, his t-shirt clung to his skin, but he didn't complain. They had a system, a rhythm, and despite the heat, despite the aching muscles and dust in their lungs, the job was getting done. Then came the noise, that awful crunch of gravel and the low mechanical growl that didn't belong. Clayton looked up. A tow truck was barreling down the edge of the field, tires spitting up rocks, its amber lights flashing like it was hunting someone. The county logo was stamped on the door, half faded by sun and time, but unmistakable. Clayton blinked in disbelief, wiping his brow again, thinking maybe the heat was playing tricks on him. But the truck didn't stop at the road. It rolled right onto the dirt, into his work zone, past the rows of crops, and came to a halt beside the tractor like it had every right to be there. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Clayton shouted, tossing the thermos aside and jogging over. His boots kicked up dry soil as he moved. "I'm working here. That's my tractor." The driver, a young guy who couldn't have been more than 20, didn't even lift his eyes. He climbed out of the cab, clipboard in hand, and handed Clayton a folded notice. The print was bold, the seal heavy and smug. Violation, unauthorized parking, complaint filed by HOA. Clayton's mouth fell open. This had to be a mistake, a sick joke. But before he could form the words, a second vehicle pulled up. Out of a shiny blue pickup stepped a woman who looked like she had never spent more than 10 minutes under the sun. Her blouse was starched, her sunglasses mirrored, and her heels sank slightly into the dry earth as she walked with a sense of ownership that didn't belong. She didn't glance at the crops. She didn't acknowledge Benny, now frozen in place by the trailer. She walked straight toward Clayton like she was inspecting something beneath her standards. Karen Latchfield, head of the local homeowners association. "You're in violation," she said, her voice high and sharp, like a whistle someone forgot to stop blowing. She pointed a manicured finger at the tractor. "That machinery is unsightly. It breaks the visual uniformity of the community. Equipment like that belongs in a garage, not out here like an abandoned wreck. Rules are rules." Clayton stared at her, the notice still crumpled in his hand. His brain tried to catch up. This was farmland. His farmland. Had been for generations. The tractor was parked on clear dirt beside the harvest rows, not on some suburban lawn. But to Karen, that didn't matter. In her mind, everything she saw was hers to regulate. "I've got work to do," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice level. "This field feeds hospitals and schools. You see that boy?" He motioned toward Benny, who now stood behind him. "He and I have been up since dawn." But Karen didn't flinch. She folded her arms, gaze cold and unmoved. "I'm sure that's very meaningful to you," she replied, "but we can't make exceptions. You want to store industrial equipment, you do it by the book. You'll have to retrieve it once you pay the fine and provide proof of proper storage arrangements." The tow truck hissed as the bed tilted, and steel chains clinked over dry ground. Clayton turned back just in time to see the hook clamp onto the tractor's undercarriage. The machine jerked, tires squealing slightly as it began to be winched up onto the metal ramp. It wasn't just a piece of equipment being hauled away. It was weeks of labor, timing, and hope. Watching it felt like watching someone rip the oxygen tank from a patient mid-surgery. He didn't yell again, didn't lunge forward or beg. He stood in stunned silence, dust swirling around his boots, while a stranger took what he needed most. His knuckles turned white around the paper in his hand, his jaw clenched so hard it ached. Benny moved to his side, confused, looking up at his father like he expected him to stop it, to fix it. but Clayton couldn't move. His feet were planted like roots. His eyes followed the tractor as it disappeared up the ramp, powerless, helpless, and all he could think was, this isn't right. This can't be right. And Karen? She simply turned back toward her truck, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. The job, in her mind, was done. Order had been restored. As the tow truck rumbled away, kicking up clouds of dust behind it, Karen Latchfield stood tall at the edge of the gravel, angling her phone with practiced precision. Her smile was tight, triumphant, and entirely without warmth. "This is how we keep order in our neighborhood," she declared into the camera, voice crisp and self-assured. She gave a short nod, like a CEO, signing off on a press release, and hit record with the satisfaction of someone who thought they were making history. Behind curtain-lined windows along the cul-de-sac, shadows moved. Curious faces peeked through blinds. No one stepped outside, but someone, somewhere, hit the like button. Out in the field, Clayton Grimm stood alone, just a man and a sea of corn now fractured by silence. His boots were half buried in dry soil, the thermos forgotten at his feet. The trailer was still half loaded, and Benny's gloves sat folded on the bumper, untouched. The sun hadn't moved, but everything else had. His tractor, the backbone of their work, was gone, hauled off like trash. What no one saw, what Karen never cared to ask, was what that tractor meant. It wasn't just farm equipment. It was part of a state program leased to Clayton under an official agreement to supply emergency organic crops to public schools, hospitals, and food relief centers. He wasn't just harvesting corn. He was delivering nutrition to some of the most vulnerable people in the region. His name was on a state contract, his work audited and supported by government partners. In short, Clayton wasn't some man with an old machine parked on a lawn. He was a link in the chain of public safety. But to Karen, none of that mattered. To her, all she saw was something that didn't fit her vision. Her HOA was her castle, and anything beyond its aesthetic standards was a threat. In her mind, tractors belonged in museums or out-of-sight barns miles away. Farmers, to her, represented a version of America she wanted scrubbed clean, earthy, noisy, unpolished. She didn't see food, she saw mess. She didn't see service, she saw defiance. And worse, she saw something she couldn't control unless she called in outside force. Clayton couldn't comprehend it. He'd weathered storms, droughts, failed harvests, even a barn fire once. But this was something else. This was someone dismantling his life's work, not out of necessity, but out of preference. One person, armed with nothing but a clipboard and a camera, had just undone months of preparation. Not because of law, not because of danger, because she didn't like how it looked. He stood there, trying to breathe past the rising tightness in his chest. Around him, the corn still swayed gently in the breeze, oblivious to what had just happened. Benny hadn't said a word since the truck left. He sat on the edge of the trailer, small hands gripping his knees, waiting for his dad to explain why they weren't doing anything, why no one was stopping this. But what could Clayton say? That someone's opinion had more weight than their labor? That paperwork beat purpose? That a single voice, sharp and entitled, could outweigh a field full of need? And still, Karen walked back to her truck, phone in hand, tapping her screen like she just posted a great civic achievement. She didn't look back once. By morning, the damage had already begun. The crates of harvested corn sat exposed under the rising sun, the air thick with the first hints of spoilage. Without the tractor, there was no way to sort or transport the produce. Time wasn't just running out, it was working against them. One more day, and the entire crop would begin to rot, turning months of work into waste. Flies gathered at the edges. The breeze that once cooled the field now carried the sour scent of decay. Benny stood nearby, trying to swat them away, but it was a losing battle. Clayton watched in silence, his hands clenched, his jaw locked. He didn't say much to his son, just one sentence. "Stay here, I'll fix this." Then he climbed into his truck and drove straight into town. When he reached the municipal building, he didn't bother with pleasantries. He pushed through the front lobby, past the reception desk, ignoring the startled glances of security guards. His boots echoed against the tile floor as he made his way toward the administrative wing, a man on a mission. One of the guards moved to stop him, hand raised, but Clayton kept walking. "I need to speak to someone in charge," he said firmly, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "Now." A few moments later, he found himself standing in a bland conference room, facing a row of unsmiling staffers. He explained the situation, calmly, precisely. But when he finished, the reply was as dry as the paper they held. "If the HOA filed a formal complaint," one of them said, "and the county responded in accordance with that complaint, then the action falls within protocol. We don't intervene in private association matters." Clayton's eyes narrowed. He nodded once, slowly. Then he gathered his papers and walked out. He didn't go home. Instead, he parked at a quiet lot behind the courthouse, reached for his phone, and unfolded the contract again. It wasn't just any agreement. It was a signed commitment between his farm and the state, part of a statewide food security initiative to supply organic produce to schools and public institutions. The contract detailed acreage, quotas, timelines, and responsibilities. And Clayton had upheld every one of them until now. He called the governor's liaison office first, then the agricultural department, then a legal contact he hadn't spoken to in years, but who had once said, "If you ever need backup on something that matters, call me." Within 2 hours, the tone changed. Phones started ringing in the opposite direction. Clayton wasn't dismissed anymore. He wasn't a disgruntled neighbor waving a complaint. He was a state contractor whose equipment had been impounded mid-delivery. His absence on the supply chain threatened multiple institutions, and now there were questions being asked. Real questions. What authority does a local HOA have to block a state-backed operation? Under what statute can private preference override public need? When the conference call began, the voices on the other end didn't sound bored. They sounded concerned. Clayton didn't shout. He didn't insult. He didn't grandstand. He laid out dates. He referenced statutes. He provided the names of school districts depending on his produce. He explained the logistics, the financial implications, the risks. His voice was steady, almost quiet, but every word landed like a hammer. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was demanding accountability. The legal advisors listened. The governor's office requested copies of the complaint, and slowly, the tide began to turn. Behind his calm tone, there was fire. Not rage for show, but the fire of a man who had built something honest, something needed, and had watched it be torn apart for the sake of someone else's comfort. Now, he wasn't here to fight for just his land. He was fighting for the principle that no one, not even a self-important committee, gets to rewrite the rules for everyone else. And this time, someone was finally listening. On the third morning, just as the sky began to soften into its early golden hue, a dark government van rolled quietly through the gated entrance of the HOA's private community. The logo on its side was clean, unmistakable, Office of the State Attorney General. Its arrival was calm, deliberate, but it cut through the neighborhood's stillness like a silent alarm. Karen Latchfield didn't notice at first. She was out on her regular walk, gently tugging along her perfectly groomed lapdog Lulu, whose pink collar matched Karen's crisp workout jacket. She strolled the sidewalk with her usual air of ownership, smiling faintly at the manicured hedges and trimmed lawns as though they owed their neatness to her. But her confident pace slowed the moment she heard multiple car doors slam in unison. She turned and froze. 4 individuals in dark suits were approaching. No sirens, no shouting, just purposeful steps and focused eyes. They weren't lost, and they weren't there to talk about local noise ordinances. One of them carried a slim folder. Another held a legal packet. Their badges were worn plainly, their tone professional but unyielding. Karen's grip on Lulu's leash tightened. "Karen Latchfield?" one asked, his voice low and clipped. She hesitated. "Yes?" He opened the folder and began to read. "You are being served with a formal notice from the State Attorney General's office. You are under investigation for unlawful interference with a state-funded agricultural operation. The Homeowners Association under your leadership may be subject to temporary suspension of governing powers while the matter is reviewed." The words seemed to echo louder than they were spoken. Karen blinked, as though trying to process a language she didn't quite understand. She let out a quick, nervous laugh, an automatic reflex. "There must be a mistake," she began, her voice higher than usual. "This is my neighborhood. I'm the one who—" But her words faltered. The man holding the packet didn't flinch. Instead, the second agent stepped forward, eyes cool and unwavering. "No, ma'am. This property, this land, was leased from the state years ago under a special zoning agreement. You don't own it. Your HOA operates here with conditional oversight. And the individual whose tractor you had removed is not just a resident. He's a certified state contractor, fulfilling obligations under a public agricultural program. Your actions directly impeded an active state operation." Karen's face drained of color. She tried to speak again, but Lulu let out a whimper, sensing the tension. The agents handed her a copy of the complaint and a printed summary of the contract between the farm and the Department of Agriculture. The moment was quiet, but it cut deeper than any raised voice could have. Karen looked down at the documents in her hand, the embossed seal at the top, the list of statutes cited. Everything she thought she controlled, the rules, the image, the authority, had just been turned on its head in front of her neighbor's windows. No one came out to support her. No one defended her. From behind curtains and fences, people simply watched. And for the first time in a long while, Karen Latchfield didn't have anything left to say. She stood there, stunned, as the agents turned and calmly returned to the van. The door shut. The engine started. And as the vehicle pulled away, the silence it left behind felt louder than any siren. The story spread faster than wildfire and dry brush. By mid-afternoon, local news outlets had picked it up, and by evening, the headlines were everywhere, online, on TV, in inboxes and group chats. HOA sabotages harvest destined for hospitals. One banner read, "Neighborhood leader faces state backlash over tractor incident." Another was even bolder, "Woman versus tractor, state wins." But the real tipping point came not from official reports or carefully crafted articles. It came from Karen's own video, the one she'd filmed with pride, believing she was upholding order. Originally, it had been uploaded by her to the HOA's community board, but someone downloaded it, added subtitles, clipped it with the footage of the tow truck, and overlaid a new headline. "Local HOA leader tries to ban farming, fails publicly." The video exploded on social media. Thousands of shares, millions of views. It was reposted with laughing emojis, reaction clips, and duet videos from farmers across the country, mocking her tone, her words, her unwavering stare into the lens as she said, "This is how we keep order." Karen Latchfield wasn't just a name anymore. She was a meme, a symbol of overreach, a cautionary tale. Her face became the backdrop for parody of skits and commentary videos. One trending edit even dubbed her over with a dramatic movie villain monologue. The internet didn't just react, it devoured. Inside the community, the impact was immediate. Neighbors who had once looked to Karen to protect property values now whispered her name with embarrassment. Parents were furious. They had seen her decisions now directly linked to disrupting a program meant to feed children in schools and patients in hospitals. Lawn signs vanished overnight. The HOA Facebook group turned into a battlefield of comments, screenshots, and apologies. By the next morning, the HOA board convened in an emergency session. No smiles, no opening jokes, just tension thick enough to cut through. They sat at a long folding table in the clubhouse, blinds drawn to avoid the gathering press outside. One by one, members voiced concern, not just over the legal trouble, but the reputational damage. Calls had come in from state officials, donors, even neighboring associations. They weren't just facing fines, they were facing credibility collapse. It didn't take long. The vote was unanimous, no dissension, no delays. Karen Latchfield was officially removed from her position as HOA chair. The motion passed. The gavel hit the table. Just like that, her reign, once built on detailed landscaping codes, mailbox height restrictions, and relentless enforcement of neighborhood appearance, was over. Word spread quickly. A printed notice was placed at the entrance to the community. Effective immediately, Karen Latchfield has been relieved of all HOA leadership duties pending further review. For many residents, it was a quiet relief. For others, it was overdue. And for Clayton Grims, still working the fields with his son, it wasn't about revenge. It was about the principle that finally, after days of silence and struggle, someone said, "Enough." On the seventh morning, just as the mist lifted from the fields and the first rays of light stretched across the rows of corn, a flatbed truck pulled up quietly to the edge of Clayton Grims's land. There were no cameras this time, no crowd, no spectacle, just a driver in a county uniform, clipboard in hand, and one familiar machine anchored carefully in place. The tractor had been returned, cleaned, undamaged. Its paint gleamed slightly in the sun, as if it had never left. Taped to the steering wheel was a folded note, short and typed, but clear. "We apologize for the inconvenience. Your work is valued." Clayton didn't rush toward it. He walked slowly, methodically, as if confirming with each step that this wasn't a mirage. He ran a hand along the metal frame, checked the tires, touched the engine cover, then he climbed up, settled into the seat, and turned the key. The engine came alive with a deep, steady hum. No protest, no hesitation. It was back. Beside him, 12-year-old Benny stood holding a crate of corn, dirt smudged across his forearms, determination back in his eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Clayton nodded once, and they got back to it, as if the week of chaos had never happened, as if no one had tried to erase the work they'd put into this land. But something had changed. A new flag now fluttered on the pole near the barn, bright and unmistakable, the state flag. It had been a quiet gift, sent from the Agriculture Department days before, along with a formal message of support. It wasn't just fabric. It was a statement, a reminder. This farm wasn't forgotten. It was recognized, protected. They didn't pause for ceremony. Clayton simply looked up once, let the breeze carry the weight of the moment, and got back to work. The harvester rolled forward, Benny loading crate after crate into the trailer. The rhythm returned, not because the damage hadn't mattered, but because their work did. Then, a week later, another envelope arrived. No stamps, no typed label, just a handwritten address and a seal from the office of the governor. Clayton opened it at the kitchen table, calloused fingers unfolding the thick paper with care. Inside was a letter, direct, personal, and signed by the governor himself. It acknowledged what had happened. But more than that, it thanked him for his persistence, for standing his ground, for contributing to the state's sustainable food initiative during a time when reliability and integrity mattered more than ever. "Your resilience represents the best of who we are," it read. "Your role in protecting our food supply is not only seen, it is deeply appreciated." Clayton sat in silence for a long moment, the letter resting on the table in front of him. He didn't frame it, didn't call anyone. He simply folded it, placed it carefully in a drawer next to old land deeds and family keepsakes, and went back outside. There was still work to do, but now he did it knowing the state had his back, and that no one would take his tractor, his voice, or his purpose again. In the weeks that followed the public fallout, Karen Latchfield made one final move. She filed a civil lawsuit against the very HOA board she once led. The claim? Emotional distress, reputational damage, and what she described as unlawful expulsion from her leadership role. Her legal team drafted long statements about the pressure she faced, the supposed betrayal of her peers, and the toll it had taken on her well-being. The documents were delivered with the same precision she once reserved for violation notices about unapproved mailbox paint. But the courtroom was different from a neighborhood board meeting. Here, facts spoke louder than appearances. During the hearing, the judge reviewed not just the lawsuit, but the string of events that had led up to it, starting with the unauthorized tow of state-leased equipment, the public disruption of a government program, and the subsequent viral media storm that exposed her actions. Witnesses were called, contracts were submitted. A representative from the Department of Agriculture testified directly, explaining how her interference had delayed critical food deliveries to state institutions. Karen sat still through it all, flanked by her attorneys, but gone was the assertive tone and clipped certainty. Her words were measured, her posture tense. And when the verdict came, it was decisive. The court denied her claim. Not only was her case dismissed, but the ruling also mandated that she pay restitution for the losses incurred during the disruption of the harvest. It wasn't symbolic, it was real money, an amount tied directly to the value of the spoiled produce, the cost of transport delays, and the labor hours wasted because of the incident she initiated. In addition, the judge issued a supplemental order, one that drew quiet surprise from even the gallery. Karen Latchfield was to complete a certified educational course titled Understanding the Role of Agriculture in the U.S. Economy. It wasn't punitive, it was instructive and deliberate, because the issue wasn't just the act, it was the mindset that led to it. Karen never made a public statement after the ruling. No press conferences, no interviews. Within days, her social media accounts were deactivated. Her once frequent walks through the neighborhood with her dog Lulu came to a quiet end. No more HOA newsletters with bold red underlines. No more front yard meetings about aesthetic standards. Karen Latchfield had vanished from the daily rhythm of the neighborhood like a gust of wind that had finally blown itself out. And then, one morning, a small white sign appeared in front of her house. For sale by owner. No flyers, no grand announcement. Just the sign, planted neatly in the lawn, a phone number printed at the bottom. The blinds stayed drawn. The porch light remained off. Cars passed by, slowing just enough to take a second look. But the house no longer felt like a centerpiece. It was just another lot on the street. Neighbors didn't talk much about it. There wasn't a celebration, no loud declarations. But there was a quiet shift, a kind of calm that returned when noise finally faded. People tended to their gardens. Kids played without hushed warnings, and over the fields beyond the road, the tractor moved again, steady and unbothered, as if reminding them all what really fed the heart of the community. 1 month later, Clayton Grims's farm came alive with color, laughter, and the warm hum of community. The annual fall harvest celebration was in full swing, and for the first time, it was being held right there, on the land that had weathered more than just storms. Students painted tractors on easels under the oak tree, their imaginations running wild with bright reds and blues. Corn boiled in giant pots, and the air smelled of cinnamon and earth. Families gathered on hay bales, sharing food, stories, and the kind of peace that only comes when hard times have passed. Near the old tractor, clean, polished, and proudly parked like a symbol, Benny sat on a crate surrounded by classmates. He told the tale of the tractor incident as it had come to be known, with the perfect mix of humor and honesty. The kids hung on every word. Then one boy raised his hand, brow furrowed. "But what did your dad do when she took it?" A silence followed. Eyes turned towards Clayton, who stood nearby, arms crossed, a quiet smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He stepped forward, his boots soft on the grass. "I didn't do much," he said with a calm certainty. "I just proved the truth was on my side. That was enough." The kids nodded slowly, some understanding, others just feeling the weight of it. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it landed. This wasn't just a celebration of corn and crafts. It was something deeper, a quiet triumph rooted in integrity. On this land, where one person had tried to erase the value of honest work, an entire state had risen to protect it. And that truth, simple, solid, and deeply earned, was the harvest Clayton cherished most.